If they wanted to teach you, they would, but they honestly have no intention of teaching you this. This is possibly one of the biggest scandals that we're going to see in the UK in our lifetime. Mistakes have been made. So many mistakes have been made that's put us in a position that, quite honestly, I can't see us getting ourselves out of. We need to have a chat about the UK housing crisis, because we just sit here and accept that house prices are crazy expensive and we're forced to rent into properties rather than actually looking at how we got into the position that we're in right now. Because when you really look into the details, it is wild. Someone said democracy is pointless if the population don't have an understanding of economics and politics. And I don't know who said it, but I agree with them. And with a general election around the corner, we're going to figure all of this shit out one video at a time, starting with why no one can afford to buy a damn house. You know, the rest of the world isn't experiencing what we as young people are experiencing in the UK, right? And if they are, it's definitely not on the same scale. Take the US, for example. The amount of people that own properties between the ages of 25 and 34 is 6 percentage points lower today than it was 25 years ago in 1999. Not great, but okay. In Germany, it's down 8 percentage points. That's pretty bad. And in France, it's only down 3 percentage points. Comme ci, comme ça. And you might look at those figures and think, damn, like we're all in the same boat. Where does the UK sit? Maybe 7 percentage points, 4 percentage points? You would be way off. The UK always strives to be number one, and number one we are. The amount of people in the UK aged between 25 and 34 who own their own property is down 22 percentage points today compared to 1999. And the advice that's always given to young people who can't afford to buy a property to live in by those who were able to buy their property 40 and 50 years ago for £5 and a Kit Kat chunky is that young people today need to learn to sacrifice. I don't feel like they want us to enjoy life at all. I mean, what world is it that we live in where we're supposed to remove all of life's pleasures and stay on this one island the whole year round just to be able to afford a place to live? Really and truly, there's nowhere to enjoy life if you live in the UK anyway. Everything's mad expensive and it closes by 2 a.m. I mean, think about it. If we continue to sacrifice anymore, this place that we call home would start to look a lot more like HMP Great Britain. It's so wild to think that young people are expected to sacrifice absolutely everything so they can save up 150% of their salary to put down a 10% deposit on a £500,000 studio apartment in the arse crack of London. But this housing crisis isn't something that's just popped up out the blue. This has been around 45 years in the making. One of the biggest factors that's contributed to the housing crisis is the right to buy scheme, which saw millions of council houses being sold to tenants at a heavily discounted price. They pretty much just started giving them away. Now, councils had been able to sell council houses to their tenants since the Housing Act of 1936. However, you needed ministerial consent. So not everybody and anybody could buy their council house. There were checks and balances. You needed permissions. Then around 20 years later, the House Purchasing and Housing Act of 1959 was put into effect, and you no longer needed ministerial consent. However, you still needed the consent of the local authority if you wanted to buy your council house off of the council. Again though, there was still checks and balances. But in 1980, the year after Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government came into power, the floodgates opened. This was the birth of Right to Buy, which saw the government pass the Housing Act of 1980, which allowed over 5 million council house tenants to buy their council homes at a wildly discounted price. The minimum discount started at 33% with an additional 1% discount for every year over 3 years that you'd lived there. The maximum discount couldn't exceed £50,000, which today works out to roughly around £200,000. In 1980, 55% of households were homeowners. That number had jumped up to 72% by the early 2000s, which sounds great. People were getting on the property ladder if it wasn't for the fact that no one was building new houses to create social housing for the next generation. In 1979, the UK had around 6.5 million council houses providing affordable housing for those who really needed it. As of today, that number's as low as around 2 million. And you might look to the councils and wonder why they didn't just build more houses, but why would they? I mean, why would they invest in building new social housing just for the tenants to be able to buy them a few years later at a heavily discounted price? The government were hoping that the private sector would pick up the slack and start to build affordable homes for the younger British population, because private companies are so good at putting our needs before their profit margins. The reason you can't get a council house, it isn't because of immigrants and it isn't because of illegal immigrants, it's because the government flogged all the council houses and now your family have nowhere to live. And you, like me, might have thought, well, how has all of this caused the issues that we're seeing today with young people renting everywhere and not being able to buy their own house? With the amount of people that were able to buy their council houses since the 1980s, there should be loads of properties on the market. It should be a buyer's market. The truth is, the right to buy scheme never worked out the way that it was supposed to. Over 40% of the right to buy homes are now privately rented, meaning the amount of council houses available to those that need them aren't there because they're being rented out to us for astronomical prices. This also means that councils end up having to put people who they would normally put in a council house into a privately rented house and then pay the private landlords part of the tenant's rent. At this point in time, around 1 in 4 private renters in the UK receive housing benefits. Can you deep how much of an own goal this is? I mean, think about it. The council builds a house and puts someone in it that needs some help and charges them a very reduced rental fee. They then sell them that same house at a heavily discounted price. The tenant's happy because they're now in the property market. They stay there for a few years, pay off the little mortgage that they have, and then sell it for a massive profit. The council then deep that they've sold all of their properties and have nowhere to put new people who need social housing. So they end up going to the private landlord who's bought the council house that they sold in the first place for peanuts and paying that person rent at an extortionate rate. This also contributes to the competition that young people are facing when renting, which is why their rent is also crazy high. And some people are having to pay more than the asking rental amount just to be able to secure a property. Now, everything I've mentioned so far is just a part of the issue that we face in the UK as young people trying to get on the property ladder. But it is a very big part. But there are definitely some other pretty big factors. When it comes to buying properties in the UK, there is a massive wealth gap between investors who are looking to buy a property to then rent it out in the massive renting market we have in the UK, and first-time home buyers who've scraped every penny that they can to make up the 10% deposit that they need to buy a house. You also have the fact that there are a lot of property developers that own a lot of land that houses could be built on right now, but they're waiting until the value of the land is at the highest that it could possibly be, so when they do build on it, they can get the most amount of money from the houses that they build. And you can't just build houses anywhere. There has to be jobs, schools, and shops nearby just for it to be a viable place for you to live. And councils not allowing certain areas to be built upon in order to preserve the natural landscape of the community. And when you take all of that into consideration, you end up in a situation where we are now, where there isn't enough affordable housing for young people, and young people are stuck either renting or living at home with their parents. And based on the government's research, they believe 300,000 new homes need to be built every single year so that young people can move out of their parents' houses, stop renting, and have a home of their own. Despite this, over the last 10 years, they've only been able to build an average of 178,000 homes every year.